Have you ever wondered why you can easily stop eating an apple, but a bar of chocolate feels literally addictive? The answer isn't just sugar. It's a complex cocktail of psychoactive chemicals that hijack your brain's reward centers. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what each of those chemicals does, why your brain responds to chocolate the way it does, and whether that craving is something science actually takes seriously. The answer will probably surprise you. 1. Humans have always known something was different about this plant. Something was off about cacao from the beginning. People have been obsessed with it for at least 5,300 years. Not in a "this fruit tastes nice" way. In a "this is a gift from the gods and we are building a religious cult around it" way. The Maya had a goddess dedicated entirely to chocolate. Her name was Cacao. They prayed to her for fertile land, used cacao in baptisms, weddings, and funerals, and mixed the drink with chili peppers and a reddish spice called achiote. They poured it between two vessels repeatedly just to build the foam on top, because the foam was considered the best part. These were not people who had tasted a milk chocolate bar. They were drinking a cold, bitter, spicy liquid with no sugar and treating it like a sacrament. The Aztecs considered cacao more valuable than gold. Hernán Cortés wrote to King Carlos I of Spain describing the drink, which they called xocoatl, as something that builds up resistance and fights fatigue. One officer in Cortés's company reportedly observed Montezuma drinking more than 50 cups of cacao per day. Not because it was delicious, because it did something to him. People who had never heard of dopamine, who had no concept of brain chemistry, figured out through experience that this specific plant had an effect on the human brain that other plants did not. They built economies, religions, and rituals around that effect. 2. What chocolate actually is. Chocolate is not a simple food, which matters for understanding why it works the way it does. A cacao pod is harvested by hand. The seeds inside go into wooden boxes and get covered with banana leaves for 5 to 7 days, fermenting. This step is not optional. Without fermentation, the flavor compounds never fully develop. The chemical transformation that happens in those boxes is what separates a raw cacao seed from something that smells and tastes like chocolate. After fermentation, the beans are dried, then roasted. The roasting step is where many of the flavor compounds develop and are released, including some of the psychoactive ones. The beans are then cracked open, ground into a thick paste called chocolate liquor, churned in a machine for up to 72 hours to smooth the texture, mixed with cacao butter, sugar, and sometimes milk, and finally molded into the shape that ends up in the wrapper. The roasting creates and releases compounds. And cacao butter, the natural fat inside the bean, is already present before any sugar is added. By the time chocolate reaches your mouth, it already contains fat from the cacao itself, plus whatever sugar was added later. That combination, fat arriving alongside sugar, is central to everything that follows. 3. Theobromine chocolate contains more theobromine than caffeine. Most people don't know that. When they eat chocolate and feel something, they assume the caffeine is doing the work. It isn't. Theobromine is a stimulant, but it works differently. Caffeine crosses the blood-brain barrier quickly and hits the central nervous system hard. Theobromine does not cross the barrier the same way. Researchers classify it as roughly 1/5 the potency of caffeine for stimulating the brain. In practice, that translates to a calmer, longer-lasting alert feeling, without the caffeine spike and without the crash afterward. Caffeine also raises blood pressure. Theobromine lowers it. Theobromine is not addictive and does not cause withdrawal symptoms. It's one piece of the puzzle, not the main one. 4. Phenylethylamine. The second compound is phenylethylamine, usually shortened to PEA. Your brain produces this naturally. It's the same compound associated with the feeling of being in love. Researchers describe it as behaving like a kind of amphetamine inside the brain. It stimulates endorphin release and increases dopamine. Chocolate contains PEA. There's a genuine scientific debate about whether it actually matters. Some researchers argue PEA is metabolized so quickly in the digestive system that it may not reach the brain in meaningful amounts. This is genuinely contested, and there's no clean answer yet on whether the PEA in chocolate is directly producing effects in the brain or whether something else is doing the work. What isn't contested is that chocolate activates dopamine pathways. Whether PEA is the mechanism or just a passenger is still being sorted out. 5. Anandamide. In 1996, researchers identified a compound in chocolate that behaves like cannabis. It binds to the same cannabinoid receptors in your brain and produces a mild sense of euphoria. Its name comes from the Sanskrit word ananda, meaning joy, bliss, or delight. It's called anandamide, and your brain produces it naturally. Researchers now believe it's also responsible for the runner's high, which was previously attributed to endorphins. Most coverage of this story gets one thing wrong. Chocolate does not contain significant amounts of anandamide. The levels are too low to produce a direct effect from eating it. What chocolate does contain are two other compounds: N-oleoylethanolamine and N-linoleoylethanolamine. These inhibit the enzyme responsible for breaking anandamide down in your brain. Chocolate does not give you the bliss molecule. It stops your brain from losing the bliss molecules it was already making. That's a real effect, even if it's more subtle than the headlines usually make it sound. 6. Tryptophan chocolate also contains tryptophan, an amino acid your body uses to produce serotonin. Serotonin is linked to mood stability, satisfaction, and general well-being. It doesn't spike. It doesn't crash. Its presence helps explain why chocolate feels comforting in a way that goes past simple pleasure. Theobromine keeps you alert. PEA spikes dopamine. The anandamide inhibitors slow the drain of euphoria. And tryptophan quietly builds the baseline underneath all of it. And that's still not the main mechanism. 7. Fat and sugar together. In 2023, a study published in the journal Cell Metabolism found something that changed how researchers think about why certain foods feel impossible to stop eating. Fat and sugar activate separate sets of neurons. They communicate to the brain through different circuits in the vagus nerve, the long nerve running from your gut to your brain. When fat arrives, one circuit fires. When sugar arrives, a different circuit fires. When they arrive together, both fire simultaneously. The dopamine response is not additive, it's synergistic, significantly larger than the sum of each alone. Chocolate contains both at the same time in every bite. Researchers at the Monell Chemical Senses Center confirmed this in 2024, identifying the specific vagus nerve circuits that explain why fat plus sugar combinations are harder to resist than either alone. Then there's what happens with repeated exposure. A Yale School of Medicine study found that regular consumption of high-fat, high-sugar foods rewires brain circuits over time. It desensitizes dopamine receptors. The brain, flooded with dopamine repeatedly, starts reducing the number of available receptors, the same way you'd turn down the volume on a speaker that's been blasting for hours. The result is that you need more chocolate to feel what you felt before. That's not a willpower problem, that's a documented neurological process. And the same mechanism, at a much more intense level, is what happens with cocaine and opioids. 8. Is chocolate actually addictive? The DSM, the official manual for diagnosing mental disorders, does not recognize chocolate addiction as a clinical condition. At the same time, a study of more than 500 adults found that chocolate ranked as the most problematic food for addictive-like eating behaviors, higher than every other food in the study. Chocolate activates the same mesolimbic circuitry that drug and alcohol addiction activates. It triggers dopamine release, extends the anandamide window, delivers the synergistic fat sugar hit, and with repeated use desensitizes receptors in a way that creates real tolerance. The scientific consensus describes it as a powerful hedonic craving rather than a true physiological addiction. It doesn't cause withdrawal the way drugs do. It doesn't produce the same neurological dependency. But it's not the same as preferring one brand of juice over another. The mechanisms involved are in the same family as addiction, and the neuroscience consistently puts it closer to that end of the scale than most people are comfortable acknowledging. Not clinical addiction, but not a simple preference either. 9. What dark chocolate actually does for you. High cocoa dark chocolate, 70% or more, has a documented set of health benefits. It improves blood flow to the brain. Research has linked high flavanol cocoa to better attention, verbal learning, and memory. A 2024 fMRI study found that cacao, polyphenol-rich dark chocolate improved performance on long, demanding cognitive tasks. For people with mild cognitive impairment, high flavanol cocoa may slow progression toward more serious decline. On the cardiovascular side, dark chocolate consumption is associated with a significant reduction in risk of essential hypertension and a suggested reduction in risk of venous thromboembolism, a type of blood clot. In December 2024, research reported by NPR and drawing on Harvard data linked regular dark chocolate consumption to a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. The optimal amount appears to be around 50 grams per day. Above 45 grams per week, the sugar content starts to offset the benefits. The key is the cocoa percentage. The compounds responsible for these effects are in the cocoa. A milk chocolate bar with 15% cocoa and a lot of added sugar is not delivering the same results. 5,300 years ago, people with no understanding of brain chemistry figured out that this plant did something to human beings that other plants did not. They built a goddess around it, used the beans as currency, and a ruler reportedly drank it by the cup dozens of times a day. Is it addictive? The official answer is no. The neuroscience puts it closer than most people expect.